You know, one of my favorite things is our kids. I love our young people. I love our little ones. They make life interesting. I mean, no offense, but some of you guys are kind of boring, you know. You look at your pictures, y'all look the exact same 10 years ago as you did today. But those kids, they're always changing. You got to figure them out because they're moving up, they're growing, they're changing, they're becoming something more. And there's something amazing about kids. Psalm 127 in verses 3 through 5 tells us, "Behold, children are a gift from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. He will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies at the gates." Here this psalm sings out the praises of kids. Here it looks, though, as those that would be your own, but as a church, as a family, we get to share in those kids. You know, in the ancient world, the surefire sign of success, the way to success, was to have a big family. Your quiver was full of them. You wanted to have a lot of kids. My favorite example of that comes from the book of Judges, in Judges chapter 10 in verses 3 and 4, when it tells us about the judge Jair, and it tells us that he had 30 sons that rode 30 donkeys. I don't know, I just always thought that sounded funny. But it was a brag. He had 30 sons who rode 30 donkeys. I don't know about the donkey part of it, but the 30 sons meant that he, as a leader, had 30 people who would follow him. 30 men who he could rely on at any time. Having a lot of sons was a sign of power because those sons would work for you. They would farm your fields. They would take care of your livestock. They would fight in your battles. That's why you see in the book of Judges, they would always talk about how many kids they had. I think it was Gideon had 70 of them. I don't know how you have that many kids. But in the ancient world, you wanted to have a lot of kids. You needed to have a lot of kids. And really and truly, that was the way it was up until the Industrial Revolution. You can probably think back to your grandparents and great-grandparents, and what were they? They were probably one of 7 kids, one of 8 kids, right? Big families. And then after the Industrial Revolution hits, and around the 1950s, things began to change. A big family was not seen as this asset because you had all these hands to work on the farm, but rather as a liability because, well, it cost to feed them. And because of that, they began to change the amount of kids we thought were appropriate for a family. Recently, the government did an assessment of how much kids cost. And they found that raising a child from birth to 18 came up with $160,140 for a middle-income family. There's some sticker shock there. If you got a couple of them, you're in trouble, right? But much less 4 or 5 of them. But when you break it down, it's not so bad, right? That's only $8,896.66 a year, $749 or $741 a month. It's $171 a week, a mere $24 a day. For $1 a day, you too can pay for a kid. But you know, for some folks, they begin to do that math and think, well, I'm just happy with the one I got. But is that what the church does as well? Does the church make that same decision when we think about young people? We don't think about the asset part of it. We just think about what does it cost? And when you think about it, children, they can seem like a hindrance to worship. They cry, they fuss, they might make a mess. You know, it's kind of annoying, right? You're trying to listen to the preacher and a baby starts crying. Oh no, what do we do? But I'm here to tell you that babies' cry is part of the heartbeat of the church. If you don't have those cries, you don't have the messes that they make, you don't have the marks of their hands, if you look and the baby class is empty, then that's a sign that you may have some future problems looming at the door. You might be a church that will be fighting for its life very soon. Jesus understood this. In Luke chapter 18 and verses 15 and 17, there were people that were bringing their babies to him for him to touch them. The disciples saw it and they rebuked them. They told them to stop. You can imagine what they were thinking. Don't bother the teacher with those babies. He's got more important things to do. But Jesus answers in verse 16 and says, "Permit the children to come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will not enter it at all. You know, I'm afraid some think of church as not really a place for kids. But Jesus says it was. In fact, he would say it was vital. In the continuation of this passage in Mark chapter 9 and verse 36, Jesus would add here, whoever receives a child like this in my name receives me, and whoever receives me does not receive me, but him who sent me. In other words, Jesus says, if you're not willing to accept a child, you're probably not willing to accept me. And if you don't accept me, you're not going to accept my Father either. He understood how important it was. In Matthew chapter 18 and verse 6, Jesus would continue on and say, whoever causes one of these little ones to believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. Do you hear what he says? Not only should we allow them to come, but we should want them to come, and we should try to emulate them, and we should make sure we're not doing anything that would cause them to stumble. If we do, we might be on the wrong end of the wrath of God. Now, I would like to say in general that we do that. But I've seen how youth ministry sometimes gets treated. I've never known a youth minister to say, well, I just make too much money. Don't work that way. I haven't seen a youth program that just says, man, we have more help than what we need. A lot of times, young people or little ones get relegated to the back, told to sit and be quiet. Not much listened to, not much concerned. Our young people are almost an afterthought. Well, we got to do something, but what do we do? And I think because of this, we are missing out on one of our most valuable resources, not only as an opportunity for us, but a chance to grow. Jesus says, if you become like one of them, you're closer to the kingdom. And maybe when we don't give it the priority, we don't give it the focus, we forget about our young people. We're doing a disservice. So what can we do? What can we do to encourage and uplift our children? What can we do to help our families? What can we do to make sure that we're not rebuking and are inviting them to come? That we're not causing them to stumble, but rather we're lifting them up. We're not looking down on them, but we're rather looking to be helped by them. Let me give you some practical advice. Number one, make sure we support young families and those who will be young families. We need to do everything we can to encourage and support our young children so they will know how important they are, and the parents will know how important they are and how important they are to our worship. We should never do anything that would make people feel like it would be a problem for them to be here with their children. We need to make sure they know that they were encouraged. You know, we read in Titus chapter 2 and verse 4 there, it says, encourage the young women to love their husband and to love their children. We talked a little bit this morning about that need for encouragement. Here's that word here, but notice it says encourage. It's not to say, well, make sure to tell those young women all the things they're doing wrong, right? Or telling them what they should be doing. That's not encouraging. But rather to encourage them, to help them, to make sure they know that we're glad they're here, that they're supported, that they're wanted. And it's not just for those people who have kids, but it's also for the generation that's gonna have kids. Somebody said that to me a while back. They said, well, how come we don't have a lot of kids? And I said, well, it's because we don't have people making kids, right? We don't have that younger generation. All our people are done with that. But yet, we've lost a generation of people who would be raising their kids, but yet for some reason, they don't feel welcomed and supported at the church. And because of that, they won't be here, and most certainly they won't have their children here. Romans 12:10 tells us to be devoted to one another in brotherly love, giving preference to one another in honor. We should never have the attitude that unfortunately is sometimes expressed that an older generation will say, well, this is our time, we're in charge, and when we're gone, then you can do whatever you want. But as for now, we want to do what we want to do. We like it this way, we are in charge, so that's what we're going to do. Is that giving preference to one another in honor? If you think that way, it'll be very easy for that generation and their children to go somewhere else, to find something else, because they don't have the support that they need. They don't have the encouragement that they need, because it's difficult. Getting a kid up, getting them dressed, getting them to church, making sure they behave, it can be a job. And if we make it a job that we feel like people are failing at, and they're not wanted, well, then they won't be here. That's why not only do we need to support young families and those to be due, but we need to make sure that we are making things easier. There are already so many difficulties for parents who are trying to worship with children. And we should make sure that we are doing everything we can to make it easier for them. We want to be assistants to them and never do anything that might make them think it would be best for them to be away. Can I tell you some practical things that might do that? And I know I'm going to get into meddling here, but you know when you have kids, sometimes they throw a fit. Sometimes it was a bad day and they just get upset, and mom and dad have to take them out of the services. But you know what they love to do? They love to be sitting at the very front and have to do the entire walk all the way to the back. Why? Because everybody else is sitting in the back, or everybody's sitting on the outside. I know we've claimed that territory many years ago, but you know it might be considerate sometimes to give those spaces to people who have young children who might have to deal with some difficulties. They may have to get up and go a little bit more. And it might be nice for them to not have to do it all the way from the front. It might be just a way to think about, hey, maybe it would be easier for them if they had the spot outside on the aisle and in the back. What about how we treat them when we get here? You know, years ago I was at a congregation that was a rather older congregation, and they were wanting to have more young people. And I noticed a peculiar habit that they had. When they would get a young family in, they would be so excited that they'd want them to do stuff. But these people would be coming with their kids and everything, and then they would expect them, hey, can you lead singing? Hey, can you teach this Bible class? Hey, can you take over this program? And then wanting to be involved and active would do that, but it really made it a burden on them. Because if they were having to teach class, well, then they were having to get their own kids to class. And if there was a problem, well, then they couldn't be there to take care of it. You know, if they were in worship, if the husband was up there doing something in worship, well, he couldn't be there helping the wife with the kids. And since he was having to do it every Sunday and every opportunity, we almost just overburdened them. Sometimes older generations will do that. We think about classes. Well, the parents can teach those classes. Yes. But maybe it would be nice if they could sit in their own class for a change and get a break. Maybe it would be nice to think about how we can lower the expectation and the burden that they might have when they're already having to make sure their kids are there. What about even just giving them a helping hand? I had a friend that one time we had gone to eat lunch together, and while we were sitting there, we had just about finished up, and we were just sitting there talking, and he looked over to the table beside us, and there was a young mother there, and she had her pretty young kid, and she had him there, and he was fussing because he was tired of sitting in his carrier, and he wanted to be held, but she was trying to eat lunch. And you ever seen a mom try to eat with one hand and hold the kid and the bottle in the other hand? It just doesn't work. And he just looked over to that lady, and he just she was just the table across. He just leaned over and he said, "Can I hold your baby?" Now, she looked at him, and I can tell you this, normally if some stranger just looks and says, "Can I hold your baby?" a mother does not do that. But I guess she was just desperate enough that she said, "Sure." And he reached over and he held the baby, and he was having a good old time playing with the baby. He was an older man, hadn't kids for a long time. He was good there. And that lady got to eat with both hands, and you would have thought he just gave her $1,000. Why? Because she was having a hard time, and it was just nice that there was somebody who cared enough and noticed enough to pick up. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go steal somebody's kid, but Romans 12:13 says to practice hospitality, contribute to the needs of the saints. Practicing hospitality is seeing a need that somebody has and doing something to make it easier. It's thinking about how can we make things easier for those who have kids. Let me give you another example. I knew a church that was designed in the front of their auditorium, and they decided they had a room at the front, and they wanted to make it into a prayer room. It was really nice, decorated. The ladies had spent a lot of money and put it in there. And they had that at the first. When we had some people that came to church, they had a baby, and you know how babies do. They make a mess in their diaper. They need to change. She came up to me and she said, I need to change my baby. Where is the nearest changing table? And they said, well, the baby classroom is all the way down the hallway in the very back on the left. If you want to go down all the way down there, you can go. That's where it's at. And I thought, why is it there? Why isn't it right there at the beginning where it would be easy? Well, we liked what we did, but we forgot, hey, maybe we could make things easier. Practicing hospitality is making things easier. And if we want to be an asset to our young families, we need to think about how we can make things easier on them. Thirdly, we need to let kids be seen and heard and help. Kids need someone to care about them. They need someone to give them interest. They need someone to give them concern. But they also need to be treated where they are. The two biggest mistakes I often see churches take when it comes to children is they do maybe one of two extremes. Number one extreme is they think, well, let's just send them away, right? Let's just stick them somewhere, give them a coloring sheet, keep them entertained so they won't bother us. And then on the flip side, we might reverse that and say, we don't want them out, we don't want them away. Let's make them come and be where we are. Maybe take a young kid and stick them in an adult class. Well, they're not adults. That's not good for them. And either we just kind of don't do it, just keep them away and don't do anything, or we try to make them an adult, and that's not what they need. Hebrew writer tells us in Hebrews chapter 5, verses 13 and 14, everyone who partakes of only milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is an infant. But solid food is for the mature, who, because of practice, have had their senses trained to discern good and evil. Here he's talking about those who needed to mature, who were adults that were acting like babies. But do we do the opposite sometimes and expect way more out of our young people than they're ready for? I mean, think about how we teach them. You know, when we teach them Bible class, do we use a translation that they can understand, that fits at their reading level? What about our Bible class material? Is it right for them? Does it help them where they're at to get what they're needing to learn? You know, kid at any age, whether he's a brand new newborn or before he gets to school or after he gets to school, can learn and grow, and they can learn things about God, but only if we make sure we do that. You know, that free curriculum that's for grades kindergarten to 12th grade may be easy to do, but that may not be the best thing we do for our kids. We might need to make sure that we have something that fits them at their level. That maybe we look and say, hey, you know, what can work? Talk to our Bible class teachers. They know. They know what works. They know what doesn't work. To the people who are there, to make sure they're getting what they need. As Romans 12:16 tells us, do not be of the same mind towards one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. You know, when we think of that verse, we usually think about our adult relationships, but you know, it applies very well to kids. We need to make sure that we're not so high-minded that we don't pay attention to them or care about them. We don't think that we understand everything, and maybe they don't have anything to contribute, and maybe sometimes we need to get down on their level to make sure they have what they need. Because the children are a vital part of the church. They're not just the church of the future, but they're part of the church of today. And I think if we begin to open our hearts and minds to every generation, we'll see that we have an opportunity. Not just an opportunity, but an asset. We have a wonderful asset here. As I've talked about these things, I don't want you to think I'm just saying, oh, that's all the things here. You know, this is a general lesson, but there are a lot of churches that would kill for the young people that we have, kill for the young families that we have. They're dying and they know it. But if we don't take care of that asset and use that resource, we might find that it's gone. You know, this lesson's easy for me because I love kids. And I see the importance of working with them and developing and building them up. But I can tell you the one thing I don't like about working with kids. Every year I go to church camp, work with 3rd through 6th graders. I've been in youth ministry since I started. I teach high school class, I do things, and I said, I love it, but I can tell you the one thing I hate about all of it is after you work with those kids and you develop those kids, you eventually have to send them off. Sometimes those kids go off the rails and they fall away. And you can do everything right and they make their own decisions. But the worst ones are the ones you think, if I'd have just tried a little harder, maybe if I'd have just focused a little more, maybe if I hadn't have been as little lackluster in their teaching, their instruction, if maybe we'd have put a little more effort into some of their activities and some of their training, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But then again, there's times when you read like 3 John in verse 3 and 4 when he said, I was very glad, brethren, and came and testified to the truth, knowing you were walking in truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear my children walking in the truth. Is there anything better than when you see a young person that you help to guide to the truth, and it becomes faithful and an asset to the future and the now of the church? And that's what we want to do. Because we're all children of God. We're all children of God that our Father is guiding us to what we need to be. And as obedient children, we need to make sure that we're following the path that He's put before us. And so today I ask you, child of God, are you listening to your Father? Have you followed the commands? He wants you to be part of His family. He wants you to be saved. He's given you Jesus, the one to believe in. He's told you, He's instructed you in the way you should go so that you can turn from sin. He's told you what you need to say, confess His Son as Lord. He's told you what you need to do, wash your sins away in baptism. He's told you how you need to live, not just for you, but for the example that you're setting to every generation. Today I ask you, have you been an obedient child? Are you a good example to everyone? Can those younger than you look up to you and say, that's the way I need to go? Or maybe there's something in your life that isn't being a good example, something that you need to change. If there's any way that we can help you, we want to invite you to accept the invitation of Jesus Christ right now while we stand and sing.